Can we welcome to the stage the wonderful Ian Dowding is going to come and tell us about a rather famous pudding, if I can make the technology work.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming, and thank you for listening to this rather strange talk, which is about a pudding, a dessert, if you like. And it happened locally, which is why it might be of interest, and probably a lot of you have heard of it, because it is a local dish. It was created in a restaurant in a village not far from here. A village is called Jevington. The restaurant was called The Hungry Monk, and the dessert was banoffee pie, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, yeah, here we are. We're back again. Okay, there is the Hungry Monk, as it was when it was still open. It's not open anymore. It's actually the Hungry Monk Cottages, it's called now, because the restaurant closed in 2017, or no, before that, 2014, and it's now returned back to houses. But in a tiny kitchen at the back of that building banoffee pie was created, and I'm going to tell you a bit of the story about it. I've also got some old-fashioned pictures here, which are rather nice. I think I can go to that. That's what it used to look like. That's looking at it from the other direction, and that was in the days when we had a bus. I wasn't there then. We had a bus used to come every hour on the hour, which was absolutely amazing. And that's and you can see the bus is there. To tell you the story of banoffee pie and how it came about, I've always been fascinated by dishes that have a specific name. I mean, we have all the things that we know about, like sort of steak and kidney pie or pork pie or something like that, that is just a generic type of food. But anything that has a specific name very often has a story to go with it. And I always find that sort of thing rather fascinating, because that story can be examined. I mean, when Dame Nellie Melba, the opera singer, came over to England to sing at the Albert Hall, she stayed at the Savoy. The chef there was Anton Carême, French chef, quite famous, and he created a dessert in her honor, which called it Peach Melba. And of course, that has that story. And that's always been a fascination, that anything has a name like that. Again, with something like Caesar salad, it wasn't named after Julius Caesar, it was named after Caesar Cardini, who had a restaurant in Tijuana in Mexico. And he created this very simple salad, but it seems to become popular all around the world. And because of that name, we can always trace it all the way back. And the English aren't very good at naming things like that. We're not as sort of proud as the French. The French have a wonderful history of their cuisine, and they named things very well in that sort of way. So they named them after towns, famous people, sometimes even bridges. I mean, sometimes they're mistresses, and occasionally they're battles. But of course, they only name them after the battles that they won. So you'll not find there's any chicken Agincourt around, or beef Cressy. And going back to the Duke of Wellington, as a previous speaker, you do get, of course, beef Wellington, but that's nothing to do with the Duke of Wellington. That's because if you take a whole fillet of beef and you wrap it in puff pastry and bake it, it looks like a Wellington boot. But that's on another thing. So the thing is, we're back to names again. It's because banoffee pie has a specific name, is how we can trace how it became world famous, which it has become world famous. And I would briefly tell you about my history and my part in that, which happens by sheer serendipity. I didn't necessarily want to become a chef. I became a chef, or I went to college to learn cooking because I actually didn't do very well at school. I failed my 11 plus, and I went to secondary modern school. And coming out of school, probably with only 2 O-levels, I suddenly thought, well, it's not going to open many doors for me, and I didn't want to be a builder or a farmer, which is probably what you would have turned out if you were living in Wiltshire, which was where my family were living at the time. And the idea of cooking appealed to me, and I went and did a 2-year catering course at Swindon Technical College. I didn't realise at the time I was getting actually a very, very good training, because in those days there were no ready meals around. If you worked in a restaurant anywhere, you had to make everything from scratch, and that's what we were taught. And so we were trained in the way Escoffier said that young chefs should be trained, and so we learned everything from the basics upwards. So when you went out into the catering world and you went and worked in restaurants, then you would know how to make all these things, because you couldn't get on the phone and say, I want 20 bol in the bag coq au vin from Break Brothers and 20 different desserts, because they just didn't exist. And so I did this 2-year course, and then I was a bit of a wimp, so I didn't really want to go to the big city and work somewhere, a rather large place. I wanted to work in a nice sort of cozy, small restaurant in the countryside. So I started writing around for jobs that were like that. And one of the jobs that I actually got was in a small village in Berkshire called Yattendon. And the restaurant was called the Royal Oak. And I got the job straight out of college of second chef. And I thought this was rather brilliant, that I should be able to go straight from college to get the job of assistant to the head chef, and I was the second chef. What I didn't realise, of course, was that when I got there were only 2 chefs anyway. So I was first and last commie, and I was also the sort of fridge cleaner and the floor washer and everything like that. But I knew that if I did all the vegetables, my job was going to be the lowliest job of all, that I could, if I got on and did all the vegetables first and worked really fast, then I would get on to learn the other things. Now, the head chef was called Russell, and he had all his secret recipes. But if he wanted me to help him, he was going to have to let me know what those secret recipes were, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to make anything like that. And so I walked into the kitchen on the first day with my notebook, and because he thought I was there to steal all his recipes, which of course is exactly what I was going to do. And so the other thing was that Russell was a rather strange guy. I mean, looking back on it, I was only 17, so I didn't know much about the world. And he was rather odd. Looking back now, I think he was probably bipolar. He wasn't difficult to work with or anything like that. He was just rather strange. And he was an outrageous liar as well. He told me he had an Aston Martin. And I learned afterwards that I think it was probably an old Austin that he called Martin, but that was something else completely. So I learned to make, once I got all my vegetables cooked and prepared and everything, I then started to work on this restaurant was well known for its desserts. And when I was looking through some old menus one day, and I came across it, and I said to Russell, the head chef, I said, there's this thing called Blum's Coffee Toffee Pie here. Why isn't that on the menu? Oh, he said, that's not very nice. It's not very good at all. And from other members of staff, I heard that actually it wasn't very good. It was that it was very difficult to make. And I pestered Russell and said, can we make it one day? We have a go at making it. He said, all right. So basically what this was a pastry case that was baked blind. It was baked with just an empty pastry shell. Then you made a toffee that all of you who know about cooking know that if you boil up sugar and golden syrup and cream and butter and things like that, you can get everything from a light caramel right up to Everton toffee, which is they used to sell hammers to break that up. So you had to get that right. But of course, the thing that Russell could never get right, because he didn't have a sugar thermometer, was to get the consistency right. So we used to make this thing. When it worked, it was brilliant. When you made the toffee, you let that cool down, and then you piped coffee-flavoured cream on the top, and it was absolutely delicious. But if he got it wrong, either didn't set at all, or he'd have to take he had to take a hammer and chisel to cut out. And of course, then I used to learn some very interesting words when it didn't work, and it wasn't actually culinary French, but it did widen my vocabulary quite a bit. And so I put this in my notebook, and with a question mark by it, because it was obviously there's this difficulty of getting this toffee right. Now, about this time, I've been there about sort of 9 and 10 months, and the boss came in, and he introduced us to this lady he brought with him, he introduced her as Susan Mackenzie, and he told us that her and her husband had bought this tea rooms in the village of Jevington in East Sussex, and she was there because neither of them knew anything about the restaurant trade, and Sue was going to do a short, brief study to learn a bit about the restaurant trade. And when talking to her, and I met her husband as well, Nigel Mackenzie, and they were telling me that what their plan was, they bought this place, and Nigel was going to be in the bar greeting the customers and pouring the drinks, and Sue was going to be the cook, and Sue had a sister called Jennifer, and she was going to be the waitress and would take the food out there. Of course, they needed to know a bit more about it because they were quietly out on the owner of the restaurant told me when Sue wasn't there, he said, well, because they're on a hiding to nothing because they're going to lose all their money if they know nothing about. It's well-known fact that even today that half of all restaurants that open close in the first 6 months because people get their sums wrong or they don't know how to run it, something like that. So anyway, I felt rather sorry for them, and I thought it was a rather wonderful idea, and it was a new venture, and I was quite keen to do it. And I asked them if I could join them. And I said, I don't mind what I do. I said, I'll just be a general assistant or whatever, but I like the idea of it. Unbeknown to me, they thought this was absolutely brilliant because I did have 2 years training behind me and a year in the business, so at least I knew something. And so they agreed, and I moved down to Jevington, and helped them set up everything. And it was then they informed me that they'd like me to be head chef, because by this time Sue had realised that actually cooking in a restaurant is not like an extended dinner party. It's actually a bit more complicated than that, and she was a bit nervous about doing it. And so the idea was that they would ask me to be their head chef, which was the plan all along. And I thought this was brilliant because I was 18 now, and I thought to myself, well, I'm head chef at 18. This is amazing. Of course, you know everything when you're 18, so it didn't faze me at all. But then I suddenly realised, of course, I was the only chef. Now, before it was 2 and I was a second of it, but now I was the only chef. And of course, I had to do everything, including being first commie and last commie and the floor scrubber as well. Now, I don't know why the Hungry Monk. The idea was it was called the Monk's Rest. Actually, we have a few more pictures up here, I think. Oh yes, so there is a banoffee pie. So we've sort of rather jumped ahead there, but never mind. I forgot where I was now. So that's right, the Monk's Rest. That's right. Thank you. It was called the Monk's Rest when it was a tea rooms. And they wanted to give it a sort of more sort of funkier name, and so they called it the Hungry Monk, which was it was christened that afterwards. And they opened their doors in May of 1968 with Sue and her sister in the dining room, Nigel in the bar, and me in the kitchen. Now, when you open a restaurant, first thing that happens is that people always try you out in the first few months. There's loads and loads of people trying you out, so you've got to get it fairly right at the beginning. And Nigel was actually a very good businessman, and he knew what the public wanted. I thought he was very clever like that. Sue and Jennifer were 2 rather beautiful ladies with long blonde hair, and they were sort of greeting the customers and serving in the dining room. And my food must have been okay, because in those first few months, it really took off really well. And not only that, in the first, the Good Food Guide used to come out in those days, used to come out in January. And the following January, after the May when we opened, we got a place in the Good Food Guide, which you only got on merit. You couldn't ask to be in there or pay to be in there or anything like that. So it must have been pretty good like that. And I did all the dishes that I'd learned at college and all the things that I'd learned at the previous restaurant before. Now, and all the desserts except for Blum's coffee toffee pie, which is still in my book with a little question mark by it. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit about my sister this time, because she comes into the story here. Now, my sister was 2 years older than me, and she was much cleverer, and she passed her 11 plus, and she went to grammar school. And when she went to her careers teacher, she was also a very gifted artist. She said to the careers master that she wanted to be an artist. She was just laughed at. And they said to her, if you become an artist, my dear, they said, you'll either starve or you'll become a teacher. They said, our advice to you is to go and do a shorthand typing course and get a job in an office. Because in a couple of years, you'll have met a nice young man, you'll have a couple of children, and you won't need a job anymore. So that was the sort of advice they got. So that's what my sister did. Yeah. So that's what my sister did. And every now and again, we met up for a drink to ask talk about how our careers were going. My sister Jane was very bored by the whole thing, especially when I was telling her about I was having quite a lot of fun. And so the next thing I hear from her, she sends me a postcard, and she's given up the job of working in a builder's merchants, I think, doing invoices. And she was on these cruises down the Rhine and having a very good time. When she came back from that job, she came to visit me at the Hungry Monk, and because the Hungry Monk was getting a lot busier, Nigel Mackenzie offered her a job there because we needed more staff. And one evening, we were sitting around having a drink after work, as one does, and Jane was telling us about doing these cruises down the Rhine. And of course, they catered for everyone. People stayed on board, and they had restaurants and everything. And she said there was one chef, she said, he was Greek. She said he was incredibly strong. And she said he could lift a stock pot with one hand. Really, she said, with one hand, even if it was full. She said, even if it was full of cans of condensed milk. And I said, well, why would he have a stock pot full of cans of condensed milk? She said, well, he used to boil them up. He used to boil them for 3 hours, and you get this wonderful soft toffee. And suddenly I had this light bulb moment, and I thought, hang on a minute, I could reproduce Blum's coffee toffee pie and get it right every single time, if this works. So the next time I went to the cash and carry, I bought a case of condensed milk, loaded it up in the stock pot, boiled it for 3 hours, and sure enough, you boil the can completely unopened, and it won't explode. Well, we may talk about that later. They won't explode if you don't let the saucepan boil dry. And if you do, you can put them up on the shelf, and they'll sit there until you want them. And every time you open the can, you've got this luscious, soft toffee. It's always the same consistency, and it has this rich, dark flavour. And so for the first time ever, I reproduced Blum's coffee toffee pie and put it on the menu. And everybody liked it. Everybody thought it was an absolute winner, except for my boss this time, who was always tasking me to do something to improve on something, to make it even better. French classics, can we even make this even better? And when he tried it, he said, yes, it's lovely. He said, but it needs something else. It needs another layer. And he tasked me to try something and find out what it was. So we tried lots of things. We tried it with a layer of sort of pecan nuts, like pecan pie. We tried it with apple, with cooked apple. And we tried it with some things that didn't work, like mandarin oranges, which was disgusting. And then I had some bananas, and I thought it was quite interesting because it seemed right at the time, because if you slice a banana that way, it fits perfectly into a round tart tin. And so we got this soft toffee and a layer of bananas, and then a layer of this coffee-flavoured whipped cream, and it was very popular. But of course, there was somebody else who wasn't very happy about this now, because the young lady who the menus used to be done on blackboards with chalk. And always the waitress who had the nicest handwriting would always be chosen to do this. And now she complained because she couldn't get Blums, coffee, toffee, banana pie all on one line. And so in that kitchen, and I've never claimed that I was the first person to put together a combination of toffee and bananas and coffee-flavoured whipped cream. But what I do know, that Nigel Mackenzie said we'll overcome that problem. He said, we'll make a portmanteau word out of the syllables and we'll call it banoffee. And we spelt it originally with an I at the end to try and cover up the fact that we had actually invented this word. I know everyone spells it with a double E now, but that doesn't really matter. And then because it was Nigel's idea, we bring out some cookbooks as well, because we were quite successful at this time. And eventually we started to see that the whole idea of banoffee and a lot of the other dishes that we were doing at the same time was spreading, and people were getting to know about it even more. That's how it started. It's pure serendipity. And now, of course, with the internet and everything, and things go on the internet, there was a point when I realized there were an awful lot of stories going about how banoffee had started, and they were all wrong. Some of them were absolutely outrageous. And so I used to write articles for the trade press, and one day I wrote an article and I sent it to The Guardian, actually, and the story I told was exactly what I've told you here today. And the Guardian printed it. It was in their Saturday magazine. And that was, from that moment on, it just shows you the power of the press. From that moment on, everything that was on the internet does mostly get it correct. And two questions I get asked whenever I do this talk is, one, have you brought any with you? And unfortunately, I'm afraid I haven't. And the other question is, have I ever made any money out of it? And no, I haven't made any money out of it, because you can't copyright a recipe. But all I know is, and one day I'll be dead and gone and probably forgotten. My thing about it is that someone, somewhere in the world, will be making a banoffee pie, and that's good enough for me. So,
thank you, excellent. Stay there. Ian Dowding, the creator of the banoffee pie.
Thank you.